Close your eyes for a moment. Feel salt on the breeze and the tremor of distant bronze shields. Tonight we set sail, not for the well-lit harbours of Zeus and Heracles, but for the quieter inlets where lesser-sung champions wait. Their names might not echo from every marble pedestal, yet their footprints lace the very grain of Greek myth. Kings who wove whole cities together with nothing but resolve, huntresses who outran the wind, princes who traded comfort for impossible vows, and wanderers whose cunning proved sharper than any spear. Across the next 2+ hours, we'll thread labyrinths, stalk boars through moonlit orchards, bargain with river gods, and outfox monsters born from humankind's oldest fears. Some of our travellers will chase glory and find tragedy. Others will shoulder grief and discover an unexpected kind of heroism. A few may even glimpse redemption in the shimmer between sea and sky. Though, as you'll hear, every triumph extracts its price in the coin of fate. Each story you're about to hear flows as a miniature epic, a full arc of origin, ordeal, and aftermath, told in richly painted detail so you can taste the campfire ash, hear the harpstring hum, and feel the jolt when bronze meets bone. I'll guide you chronologically through a loose sweep of the mythic age, but don't worry about memorizing family trees. Just let each tale pull you forward, the way a half-forgotten melody insists on its next note. And if this is your first voyage with us, welcome aboard. To everyone returning, your steady support is the wind in these sails. If the stories move you, please tap the like button and consider subscribing. It's a simple way to tell the algorithmic fates that long-form myth still matters, and to make sure you never miss the next chapter. But enough of that. Whether you're here for study, for bedtime immersion, or for company on a long commute, settle in. Find a comfortable chair, dim the lights, maybe slip on headphones if the world outside is noisy. The Aegean is dark, the oars are poised, and the first horizon is already lightening to a promise, or perhaps a warning. Breathe in. Exhale slowly. Our voyage through the hidden corridors of Greek legend begins now. Menelaus, red-haired king who outlived the storm. Laconia's winter builds slowly, layer on layer of chill dawns that harden olive leaves into silver scalpels and make the Euripides glimmer like hammered bronze beneath frost. Menelaus first sensed that winter's hush when he was a boy, small enough to hide behind the palace pilasters and watch his elder brother Agamemnon rehearse princely speeches for an audience of pigeons. Agamemnon's words about tribute and alliance tumbled like river stones. Menelaus cared more for the wind that kept trying to steal the scroll from his brother's fingers. He learned early that power spoke in orations, but destiny often murmured on unseen currents, coaxing sails or scattering them. The brothers trained together under twin tutelage. Spartan instructors shaped their backs with shield weight, while Castor and Polydeuces, their cousins and already legends, taught subtler arts. Castor drilled the younger boys in the low, economical sword cuts that win real battles, not tawny applause. Polydeuces boxed with Menelaus under cypress shade, hands wrapped in rawhide. Each time the lad bled, he clenched his jaw, determined to trap pain behind his teeth so it could ripen into something useful. When his nose broke for the first time, he reset it against a tree trunk, heedless of tears, earning a wolf grunt of approval from the Dioscuri. Years gathered mass. Menelaus grew heavier across the shoulders than Agamemnon, though he never lost the restless lean that made Helen later say he was built like a bow, quiet until drawn, then utterly committed to line and release. He first saw her in the colonnade, leaning over the parapet to drop pomegranate seeds on passing servants. The seeds spattered like tiny red suns, and she laughed without apology. He thought the laugh sounded like the winter wind that once stole Agamemnon's speech, merry, but promising havoc if ignored. When Tyndareus announced the contest for Helen's hand, suitors arrived in spear-thick caravans. Ajax towered, Idomeneus dazzled with islands talk, Odysseus amused, then unsettled with riddles. Menelaus brought no mountains of bronze, only a single flawless apple he had found the previous autumn while hunting boar. He offered it, unsliced, to Helen, as if proposing she decide for herself when sweetness should be revealed. She bit immediately, juice on her lip, and Tyndareus saw more choice in that bite than in years of political calculus. Menelaus was named husband. By Odysseus's clever advice, every rejected lord swore to defend the marriage. A network of oaths tightened around Laconia, invisible yet iron. Marriage settled like warm wool across Menelaus' shoulders. He and Helen raced chariots at dawn, her hair streaming past him like solar flare. He presided over council, but ceded wine-mixing rights to her, trusting the palate that judged apples by scent alone. They had Hermione, whose first cry was a melodic trilling, as though she corrected the very idea of wailing. Sparta thrived. Taxes lowered, fields drained, trade lanes cleared of pirates by joint patrol with Messenia. Menelaus walked ramparts at dusk and felt his city breathing calmly, each clay roof tile lit by brazier glow, like a constellation arranged for mortals. Into that peace sailed Paris, star-glossy and perfumed, claiming to judge Spartan racing horses for Trojan markets. Menelaus, bound by Xenia, fed the prince figs drizzled in thyme honey, proud to display Laconian bounty. Paris's eyes, however, kept sliding toward Helen with gravitational inevitability. Menelaus noticed. He chose courtesy over insult, believing oaths sufficient guardrails. When word came that Cretan king Catreus lay dying, Menelaus left to pay condolences. 2 nights' sail, hardly more than a ceremonial absence. He returned to breached quiet. Servants huddled like broken reeds. Helen vanished, taken with jewels, linens, even her perfumed combs. Hermione screamed for a mother who could not hear. Menelaus's roar answered, echo pounding cedar rafters until hinges rattled. He smashed a crater, its wine spreading across marble in arterial bloom. Over that pool, he swore Paris's name would be washed in 10 years of Trojan blood, if necessary. Agamemnon arrived the next dawn, Mycenaean entourage gleaming. He reminded his brother of the suitor's vow. Menelaus felt 2 heat sources in his breast, rage and gratitude, clocked like dual suns. He clasped Agamemnon's wrist, and the older king nodded. To Ajax, to Diomedes, to Odysseus, letters soon flew like urgent arrows. At Aulis the assembled fleet moored tight as wallstones. Black-beaked prows nipped tide. Bronze armor clinked over every conversation. The wind, spiteful, refused. Artemis had been slighted, seers said. Agamemnon resolved his grim sacrifice. Menelaus stood apart as the altar's smoke coiled skyward, thinking of Hermione's soft laugh, of Helen's decisive apple bite, of how choices propagate like waves against harbour pylons. When the first gust finally bellied sails, sailors prayed, yet the brothers merely exhaled. War had become unavoidable thunder. Night crossing the Aegean tasted of brine and torch ash. Menelaus paced deck planks, mind rehearsing first clash. He pictured Paris's jeweled cuirass, the lax grip that suggested more lyre practice than spear drill. He vowed to end the war swiftly by duel if honor allowed. Odysseus warned him. Trojans are adept at prolonging dances that ought to conclude in a single chord. Menelaus replied that Sparta's dance ends with a blade-sharp step. Odysseus only smiled. Gaze skimming stars for omens. They landed on Ilium's strand under dawn, the colour of fresh-struck copper. Protesilaus, too eager, leapt first and paid the omen's debt. Menelaus disembarked measured, planting shield then foot, feeling Trojan sand compress. He murmured Hermione's name to the breeze. An arrow whistled past, reminding him that memory must yield to present steel. Laconian lines formed behind him, hoplites in red-dipped cloaks, shields squared like nested roof tiles, spears angled into rising sun, a forest of lethal intentions. For months war undulated between wall and ship, never tipping decisively. Menelaus led beach sorties, spearing Dardanian skirmishers who ventured too near supply paths. Yet each dusk he scanned ramparts for Helen's silhouette, heart snagging when torchlight gilded distant braids. Odysseus mocked softly. Better to hunt boar than shadows. Menelaus didn't answer. In Sparta they teach silence as second shield. At last, Hector proposed single combat between the wronged husband and the thief. Paris accepted with confidence that puzzled even Trojan allies. Perhaps Aphrodite's lip paint still tingled on his cheek. Perhaps he believed Helen's eyes an amulet against any spear. The dueling ground was traced. Oxhide thongs cast lots, and armies formed a ring loud with withheld breath. Menelaus stalked forward, bronze shimmering. He thought not of crowd, not of gods, only of that winter wind of childhood, relentless, unseen, unstoppable when channeled. Paris's spear glanced off Menelaus's shield. Menelaus's iron point hammered the Trojan's helm, splitting crest feathers. He yanked Paris forward by chin strap, sword poised for throat. In that frozen pause he tasted salt of imminent justice, but strap snapped by goddess hands. Paris vanished in unnatural mist. Menelaus swung at empty air, blade whining like bereft mother. The duel declared unresolved. War resumed with fiercer appetite. Achilles slew Hector. Odysseus conceived deception in cedar. Greek carpenters shaped the horse. Menelaus volunteered for its hollow belly. Inside, cramped in cedar dusk, he fingered the pommel of his sword until knuckles numbed, mouthing Hermione's lullaby to steady breath. When Sinon opened hatch and night spilled inside, he followed Odysseus through corridors he'd once strolled as guest. He found Paris wounded near the altar of Apollo's archer aspect. Their eyes locked, a dialogue no poet heard. Regret, arrogance, ironic recognition. Menelaus's blade finished what a decade had begun. Helen waited in the royal women's hall, lamplight sketching neckline curves that no exile's dust could dim. Menelaus approached slowly. She whispered his name, syllables trembling as arrows once trembled in Trojan strings. He touched a strand of her hair, as if confirming reality. Neither apology nor accusation crossed their lips. Some force larger than guilt or forgiveness lifted their clasped hands and guided them down to the beach where Greek ships floated like patient ghosts. Parting Troy for home, Menelaus's fleet wandered years through quarrelling winds. Proteus the shape-singer wrestled with him on a Libyan shore, revealing that Zeus owed safe harbour, yet demanded expiatory rites. Menelaus obeyed, sacrificing heifers, pouring wine until sand darkened. When at last Cape Malea broke horizon, its cliffs bruised purple in sunrise, he tasted Laconian air again and almost wept. But Hermione was gone to Neoptolemus, and Sparta had matured without him. Vines thicker, market cries in new cadences. He and Helen crossed palace thresholds faded by 10 salt-heavy winters. Servants bowed deeper, uncertain. Does one honor a legend or pity a man who traded countless lives for a single embrace? Menelaus dismissed judgment. He walked colonnades with Helen at dusk, telling her of constellations newly learned during wandering, and she taught him names of garden herbs that had seeded themselves in her absence. Their conversations unfolded like net mending, loop after loop, weaving rents into new patterns nothing could exactly restore, yet nothing could easily sever. And so Menelaus entered autumn of life, neither triumphant nor broken, but tempered, bronze cooled in seawater, etched with storms. He governed with quieter rigour, roads repaved, exiles recalled, altars dedicated to both Zeus and Nemesis, lest memory slacken. Helen directed looms that produced linens softer than rumour expected, proving beauty still serves better cause than war. Some winter's snow returned, light as pomegranate pith. Menelaus would stand on parapets, feel that same wind of childhood's shoulder past him toward Taygetus, and smile. It had stolen Agamemnon's humble scroll, yes, and later nearly stolen Helen forever. Yet he had survived its gusts, learned to lean where it leaned, to trim sail rather than curse gale. He understood at last that outliving the storm is its own form of victory, and that the red in his hair mirrored every dawn still offered to those willing to rebuild after winds have done their worst. In the first spring after his return, Menelaus walked the orchards at dawn, passing branches swollen with blossoms that had thrived unguided through 10 war-torn years. Each petal carried a whisper of what the world had done, while he chased vengeance across the wine-dark sea. He closed his eyes and inhaled the mingled scents, almond, fennel, damp loam, until memory of Troy's ash smell retreated like a tide. Reopening his eyes, he found Helen watching from the terrace, veil drifting in the mild wind. No guards flanked her. Sparta no longer feared abduction, and she no longer feared its judgment. Their gaze held, not the dazzled wonder of youth, but the tempered regard of iron that has known the forge twice over. He raised 2 fingers. She answered with the faintest nod, and that small exchange rewove a domestic covenant stronger than any treaty parchment. Yet peace, like fruit, ripens only under steady tending. Rumours reached Laconia that Aegisthus had slain Agamemnon on homecoming night, that Clytemnestra shared the blood-slicked knife, that Orestes, a boy when Helen last rocked him on her knee, was now an exile plotting revenge. Menelaus felt grief as iron filings in his throat, but Sparta needed its king whole. He dispatched envoys bearing bronze-beaked helmets for Mycenae's orphan soldiery, hoping to dampen factional blades with gifts, then turned to his own frontiers where Arcadian bandits had grown bold during absent years. He rode with a lean guard through cedar gorges, reclaiming watchtowers stone by stone, never raising taxation beyond the weight citizens already knew. Where others might trumpet victories, he permitted only one heraldic change, a new shield device, 2 crossed oars behind a spear, to remind Laconia that kingdoms stand on both harvest and voyage, blade and rudder equally. Helen restored palatial courtyards, planting iris beds wherever scars of neglect marbled the earth. She taught weavers from Pylos new dye gradations, shading linen from dusk lilac to sunrise amber so subtly that distant monarchs sent agents begging lengths at any price. Proceeds purchased grain against lean years, but Helen insisted each bolt carry an embroidered crane in flight, a symbol that beauty, if well flown, could migrate beyond siege walls. Several winters later, A lean figure in wolfskin arrived unannounced, asking audience while snow patched the hills. Telemachus, Odysseus's son, now bearded with salt spray shadow, entered the Megaron like a question awaiting answering lines. He told of Ithaca, overrun by suitors, of Penelope's weaving subterfuge, and of his own voyage seeking rumours of a father lost to wander current. Menelaus listened, nodding at currents he too had fought. Helen listened, fingertips trembling at mention of loom and siege of silver-tongued men. When the tale ended, the king rose and fetched an alabaster casket shaped like a dove, a wedding gift from Hephaestus to Helen, never opened since departure for Troy. Inside nested a fine-cut emerald, sea-green shot with gold filaments, the very colour, Helen said, of calm shallows around Pharos. She pressed it into Telemachus's palm. "Carry a piece of safe water," she whispered, "so storms may remember to spare you." Menelaus added a carved driftwood model of the pine shadow, as charm against hidden reefs. That night Telemachus dined on spiced goat and sweet figs, then retired to the guest wing. Menelaus could not sleep. Telemachus's quest stirred questions unspoken between husband and wife. Were Odysseus's endless detours fate or flaw? Had Helen truly chosen Paris, or had gods tugged puppet strings? In bedchamber torchlight the couple unpacked a decade in hushed syllables, not for absolution, but for clarity. Menelaus confessed that the war's thunder still rattled his dreams. Helen confessed that Troy's quiet night still pricked her with homesickness for Spartan songbirds. They agreed to walk the ramparts together each dawn, recalibrating memory under honest light. News from Mycenae worsened. Aegisthus had crowned himself, Orestes had struck, Clytemnestra lay dead, furies stalked the boy king's mind. Menelaus weighed intervention. Sparta's elders urged caution. Mycenae's chaos might spill across borders. Hermione, visiting from Epirote Epirus with young son Tissamenus, argued bloodline responsibility. Mycenae was cousin to Laconia by more than one tangled thread. Helen, remembering a sister slain, kept counsel quiet but eyes bright. Menelaus marched with a token force, not to subdue but to steady. He found Orestes at Delphi, fresh from trial by Athena's stone gavel, and offered sanctuary until Mycenae's dust settled. The young man's eyes swam with haunted starlight. Yet when Menelaus clasped his shoulder, the tremor eased, as if the king's weathered hand bridged the chasm between child and parent, blood and atonement. They returned south, and for a season Orestes practiced governance under Spartan tutelage, learning that remorse must be hammered into laws that outlive it. The gods, appeased by hecatombs and hero funerals, left Laconia largely undisturbed, save for a strange summer when the Euripides receded overnight, revealing Bronze Age spearheads glinting like teeth. Diviners proclaimed it a reminder that old wars sleep beneath every ploughed field. Menelaus ordered the spearheads gathered, melted, forged into ploughshares stamped with a dove, plant seed where once blood spilled. Farmers accepted them with wary smiles, uncertain if metal remembers former violence. Wheat harvest that year was the richest in a generation. Some credited improved irrigation, others praised kingly wisdom. Menelaus privately thanked any river god listening. Age silvered his red mane. Helen's hair turned moonlit flax, but no less luminous. On their 30th wedding feast, a bard sang a new epic tracing Helen's lineage to Nemesis and a swan. During the stanza describing her abduction, older nobles flinched, fearing Helen might break under old shame. She merely sipped wine, eyes steady on her husband, who chuckled at the embellished details, Paris rescuing her from Spartan cruelty, Zeus intervening. When the bard finished, Menelaus rose, raised cup, and toasted the power of stories to bend but never break truth. Helen clinked her cup to his, affirming that even bent iron can be reforged. Later, alone on the palace balcony, Menelaus confessed a dream recurring. He walks Troy's silent streets, finds a cedar horse rotting, splits it open to discover only a single laurel seed. He plants it, wakes before it sprouts. Helen answered that laurel thrives on scorched ground. Perhaps the dream asked him to revisit ruin and germinate healing. She suggested a pilgrimage to Ilium's remains. Against councillor protest, they sailed with small escort, anchoring near the silted harbour where seabirds nested among Trojan bricks. They walked the plain guided by skylark song. At Hector's cairn, Menelaus laid a wreath, one king honouring another. Helen, fingertips gliding across sun-warm limestone, murmured names of women she had known inside those walls. Andromache, Hecabe, Polyxena. Each name rose, caught wind, and scattered like thistledown seeds. Returning, they stopped at Lesbos to judge a poetry contest. A young lyrist named Sappho performed verses where love hung between longing and flame. Helen wept openly, so moved was she by a line likening desire to limbs trembling like green oak in wind. Menelaus applauded until palms burned. He later funded an academy at Lesbos, so that women's voices would not rely solely on myth for echo. Sparta aged along with its rulers. Streets widened for new chariot design. A temple to Nemesis rose beside shrines to Athena and Apollo. Acknowledging balance must accompany sternness. On festival days, Helen presided over foot races of girls, awarding myrtle crowns. Menelaus supervised javelin contests for veterans, reminding them technique ages slower than sinew. In council, he embraced taxation measured in grain rather than coin, reasoning that hunger undermines loyalty quicker than empty treasuries. When news finally came that Odysseus had slipped ashore on Ithaca and slaughtered Penelope's suitors with Telemachus, Menelaus hosted a libation at the harbour library. He poured wine into deep bowls, one for Zeus Xenios, guardian of hospitality so often tested, one for Athena, whose stratagems bridge mortal and divine, and one, surprisingly, for Aphrodite, whose sparks, if uncontrolled, can incinerate wooden cities, but, if tempered, can warm kingdoms through long winters. Helen tilted her cup to that last invocation, acknowledging the double-edged goddess now as necessary companion more than foe. Winter returned once more, heavy with sleet. While inspecting mountain garrisons, Menelaus's mount slipped on icy scree. The king landed hard, ribs cracking like baked clay. Transported back, he endured fever that painted Ilium's red flash behind his eyelids. Helen sat vigil, weaving thin crimson thread into fresh cloth, a symbolic suture. He awakened at first thaw, weaker, yet eyes still wildfire bright. He asked to see Arcadian itinerant merchants, purchased cedar seedlings, and commanded planting along the Euripides banks. Let roots drink where shields once rusted, he said. Some seedlings failed, but many clutched soil, and by next decade, river walks smelled of pledges kept. The final year of his reign he limped often, leaning on a staff carved with intertwined oars and spears. One twilight, he and Helen stood again on palace roof, watching cranes migrate south in chevron flight. He recited lines Sappho had sent in gratitude, verses about love's arrow wounds that nevertheless teach the body to sing. Helen rested head on his shoulder, so light now he feared wind might whisk her away, and murmured that few arrows had flown truer than theirs, though many missed their intended marks before striking home. One winter dawn, Menelaus failed to rise. Helen found him seated at a window bench, staff across knees, eyes closed as though meditating on distant surf. Physicians declared heart stilled, no struggle, no gasp. Helen dressed him in the cloak she'd dyed saffron for their wedding night, laid a single leather scroll in his hand. Proteus's prophecy, copied by palace scribes, edges brittle. She oversaw pyre construction outside Amyclae, where red soil contrasted ash. Flames roared, curling his staff into a question mark as it burned. Hermione sailed from Epirus, her sons beside her, and took her mother's hand at shoreline, where residue of smoke drifted like faded banners. Helen kissed each child, then announced intention to join Menelaus on the road of stories. She retired to the temple of Aphrodite Aria, fasting until the third dawn, when legend says the goddess, disguised as swallow, led her along a beam of sunrise out over the Euripides, where morning mist embraced her and left no trace but the echo of wings. Bards claimed the couple reunited in the Elysian fields. Menelaus granted immortality because, unlike other sons of Atreus, he balanced fury with final clemency the day Troy fell. Fishermen cast nets near Cape Teneran and told of seeing a red-haired figure by sunset, walking wave-tops, guiding lost boats around reefs. Travellers passing Spartan cedar groves at dusk reported a lavender scent, half lilac, half smoke, and believed Helen visited her trees. Generations kept their memory less for the war they sparked than for how they came home, stitched kingdom back together, and taught that after rage recedes, one must ply patient threads. Fruit orchard, dovecote, library, sapling, whose roots survive unreliable river flow. In Sparta, no statue of Menelaus hefts shield. Instead, he is carved standing at harbour with a rope coil extended, ready to catch or release, whichever the wind requires. Beside him, Helen's likeness holds a spindle. Strands run from wool to rope, from city to sea, from myth to everyday hush, where winter wind still combs olive leaves into silver ripples, and a red-haired king, having outlived every storm, quietly endures in the stories told beneath that shifting light. Theseus, threadbearer of Knossos and Athens' dawn. Poseidon's surf foamed higher than usual the night Aethra walked barefoot across Saronic sand, Moon rinsing her hair silver. She was not alone. Athens' king Aegeus had sailed secretly to Trozen, half mad from Delphi's riddle that warned him not to loosen the bulging mouth of the wineskin until he reached his people again. Pythias, Trozen's fox-witted lord, deciphered the oracle at once. Aegeus must sire an heir in a foreign bed, lest political knives in Athens slit the cradle. That evening he plied Aegeus with Ismenian wine. At midnight he guided the king to his daughter's chamber. But gods had woven their own warp. After Aegeus left, Poseidon strode from surf in a cloak of starlight, murmured brine-deep vows, and shared Aethra's couch of rushes. Dawn found her limbs thrumming with mortals and immortals mingled after heat. When she later birthed the boy, the midwife gasped at the child's eyes. Storm blue ringed by a darker tide line, as if sea had signed its paternity. Pythias named him Theseus, one who sets places, hoping the sun would stitch realms together. Aegeus, before departing, hid sword and sandals beneath a slab of coastal limestone, instructing Aethra that when the child could lift the rock unaided, she should send him to Athens. The boy thrived on Trozen's rough pastures, climbing olive trunks before branches thickened. Shepherds learned to count their rams quickly after Theseus could wrestle a full-grown ewe into stillness, binding its legs with reeds he twisted on the spot. yet he preferred puzzles to feats. One spring he drew circles in dust, arranging pebbles until a passerby recognized Pythagorean triples, decades before Pythagoras' mother drew breath. At 16, he visited the limestone slab. Kneeling, he traced veins in the rock, the way painters study cracks in eggshells. He wedged fingertips, inhaled, and levered with legs trained by goat path sprints. Stone groaned, tilting. Beneath lay bronze sword dulled by salt air and sandals whose straps still smelled of Aegean leather. He strapped them on, kissed Aethra's brow, and declined the safer sea route to Athens. Roads reveal metal, he said, and chose the bandit-ridden isthmus. His first test lurked in Epidaurus woodlands. Periphetes, clubman of Hephaestus, who smashed skulls like walnuts. Theseus watched him hoist the bronze club overhead, joints straining. Timing the bear-sized swing, he ducked under, seized the bandit's elbow, and twisted until bone crunched. Periphetes fell. Theseus hefted the club, surprisingly balanced, and kept it for himself, resolving to measure each crime in its perpetrator's metric. Next he found Cines the pine-bender by the Corinthian narrows. Cines delighted in lashing travellers to 2 bent pines, then releasing them, tearing victims apart. Theseus offered to help with the task, feigning admiration for the trick. While Cines chose ropes, Theseus lashed him to trunks instead. The pine's recoil ripped the giant skyward. His screams snapped short like frayed rope. Theseus dragged branches together afterward, fashioning himself a bow. Near Crommyon he slew Phaea, the man-eating sow the locals called the Crommyonian bitch. Where others saw brutish animal, he noted patterns. Morning sun blinded it at one end of the valley. Positioning himself there, he loosed pinebow arrow to pierce its left eye, then finished with sword through gristle-thick neck. At Megara's cliff road loomed Siren, who forced passers-by to wash his feet, then kicked them to a tortoise waiting below. Theseus approached in ragged cloak, asked for hospitality. When Siren's muddy heel judded, Theseus knelt, but instead of washing, he yanked the ankle, flipping bandit toward sea. The tortoise feasted on its own master for once. The Isthmian approach brought Cercion the wrestler, who challenged men to pancration, then crushed ribs until organs popped. Chiron's lessons on body leverage resurfaced. Theseus observed Cercion's habit of planting left foot first. He let the giant grapple, then shifted hips, using momentum to hurl him head first. Skull met packed earth with melon thud. Locals thereafter named that flattened patch Cercionion, training ground for youth who would eventually craft Olympic wrestling. The final obstacle, Procrustes, lived just outside Eleusis, offering weary pilgrims a bed size deceptively just right. If guests were shorter, Procrustes stretched limbs. If longer, he amputated. Theseus accepted the invitation, then forced the bandit onto his own iron frame and adjusted him to fit. Axe, strokes, or hammer pulls matching crime to sentence. Athens' gates rose hazy in late afternoon glare. City whispers buzzed about newcomer-wielding club of Hephaestus and cloak stitched from boar hide. Medea, now Aegeus' sorceress wife, read omens with serpent unease. Recognizing the youth's likeness to royal features, she urged Aegeus to poison the guest at welcome feast. Yet when Theseus carved meat with sword identical to the king's hidden heirloom, Aegeus noticed, eyes widening. He dashed goblet from son's lips, embraced him, and exiled Medea in one motion, her cloud swirl exit trailing curses that future tragedies would harvest. Reunions seldom halt intrigue. Shortly after, Theseus captured Marathonian bull, a beast wrought from Poseidon's grievance with Minos, corralling it through city streets to sacrifice at Athena's altar. His popularity soared, but Athens paid annual tribute of 14 youths to Crete's labyrinth, punishment for accidental death of Minos' heir Androgeos. When next black-sailed ship readied, Theseus volunteered, vowing return or honourable void. Aegeus, heart quaking, requested sail colour signal, white for survival. Theseus agreed, though memory would later blur amid adrenaline. They landed at Knossos, escorted under moonlit horns of palace columns. Princess Ariadne watched procession, her heart snared by the only prisoner striding like a guest. She smuggled him a ball of crimson thread and word that Daedalus' labyrinth twists one rule: always follow your own path back if path remains unbroken. Theseus tied thread to entry post, navigating turns by intuition sharpened hunting Chromian sow. Finally, torch-violet shadows parted to reveal the Minotaur, half man, half bovine hunger. He gored air with horns, but Theseus dodged, stabbed base of neck where beasts hide thin to human vulnerability. Roar shook corridors, blood pooled, reflecting flicker of torchlight like spilled wine. Theseus led survivors out by rewinding thread. They fled on Cretan swift ship. On Naxos, he left Ariadne sleeping. Whether at Athena's bidding or ego's drift, the bards dispute. Dionysus claimed her consolation. Sail change promise slipped his mind as Cape Sunian's cliffs loomed. Aegeus, scanning horizon, saw black sails. Grief hurled him seaward. Waves swallowed king and prophecy alike. Theseus's triumphant step onto Port Marble echoed hollow. Joy hobbled by unintended patricide. Soon Athenians hailed him king, but crown weighed like remorse-forged iron. Grief rarely leaves a throne vacant for long. The morning after Aegeus vanished into Sunian's foam, Theseus dressed not in triumphal crimson, but in black wool, and climbed the Acropolis to face a city of tilted faces, half hopeful, half hollow with suspicion. He placed the Ashen King's signet on the altar of Athena Polias, swore to weave Atticus' scattered villages into a single tapestry, and descended the marble steps, already drafting policy in his head like a weaver counting warp threads. His first decree dissolved local monarchies, folding 12 polis under Athens via a pact called Cynicism, dwelling together. He rode the circuit of hamlets, dining on coarse barley bread at each hearth to prove no man's table beneath a king's hunger. At Marathon, he judged plough disputes beneath an old plane tree. At Eleusis, he listened to grain priestesses lament drought. By journey's end, not one spear had been lifted, and Attica bore a single weight of taxes instead of 12. To seed common pride, he founded the Panathenaea festival, a carnival flushing goats from hillsides as youths raced torch to torch along dusty roads, flames leaping like myth itself. Winners hoisted black-figured amphorae filled with Attic oil, the city's liquid sunrise. Older farmers cheered, perhaps not understanding politics, but feeling new pulse under the soil. Yet peace never lingers where fate casts long shadows. Word reached Theseus that the Amazon queen Antiope, some say Hippolyta, held a girdle forged by Ares, symbol not only of martial supremacy, but of matriarchal autonomy men of Hellas found unsettling. Whether driven by politics or desire, Theseus sailed east with a handful of veterans. Accounts diverge. Some claim he wooed Antiope with honeyed wine, others that he seized her sleeping beneath an oak. Whatever truth, she returned to Athens heavy with child, leaving the Thermodon tribe fuming. Amazon vengeance arrived at dawn beneath a crescent moon so thin It resembled a notched spear blade. Hoofbeats and war cries echoed through Piraeus as mares stamped keys, bronze-clad archers loosing shafts that fluttered like locust clouds. Antiope, torn between sisters' cause and lovers' city, donned Athenian helm and fought beside Theseus atop the Areopagus. She caught an arrow meant for him, wood cracking ribs, her blood darkening sandy limestone. Amazons retreated at last, but Jewel proved Pyrrhic. Her funeral pyre sent resin-scented smoke curling over sinuosized valleys, reminding all alliances cost bone as well as parchment. Their son Hippolytus grew under Artemisan tutelage, spurning Aphrodite's fragrant altars for the clean breath of cedar-leafed hunts. Aphrodite, unamused, plotted eventual heartbreak. She never forgets a slight, especially one against Eros. During Hippolytus' adolescence, Theseus received invitation to Pirithous' wedding in Thessaly, a celebration already rumoured to tempt disaster because centaurs, kin to groom, were notorious cup-shatterers. Theseus and Pirithous had forged fellowship earlier when Thessalian king tested the Athenians' courage by rustling cattle. Each man, impressed, chose fraternity over feud. At the nuptials, wine soon outpaced restraint. A centaur named Eurytion seized bride Hippodamia. Chaos exploded. Theseus hurled oak-leg bench like missile cracking centaur skull. Pirithous skewered another with feast knife 5 times too small for such task. Dawn revealed trampled garlands and broken lyres, but also a bond between kings tempered in riot. The friendship turned reckless. They swore to claim daughters of Zeus as wives. Helen, still pre-Trojan, flowered in Spartan courtyard. Persephone, unimaginably remote in Hades. First, they kidnapped 12-year-old Helen. Theseus left her under Attic guardianship until lawful age, planning eventual union. Her brothers Castor and Polydeuces later stormed Attica, retrieving sister before Athena's olive trees trembled at scandal. That debacle unmetabolized, the pair set sights on Persephone. Down they went through Taenaran's yawning maw, blades humming futilely against Stygian dread. Hades welcomed them with frost-smiled politeness and invited them to sit on a stone seat, the chair of forgetfulness. Once hips touched its surface, muscles fused, memories clouded as if minds grew barnacles. Tartarian seasons, no one counts them accurately, passed before Heracles, labouring to leash Cerberus, bargained for Theseus's release. Muscles bulged, ground quaked. The hero of Thebes wrenched Theseus free, though a patch of thigh remained glued forever to rock, an eternal tithe to the underworld. Pirithous, deeper in debt, stayed stone-bound. Theseus returned to daylight wearier. Penelope-like, Athens had kept suitors, factional nobles, Spartan influence, the ghost of Antiope's Amazon blood staining Agora whispers. His exile during underworld folly emboldened Menestheus, silver-tongued cousin, who painted Theseus's rule as hubris-stained. When Theseus entered city gates, cheers sounded, but loyalty's root hair already loose in soil. Shortly after, Phaedra, Ariadne's younger sister, arrived to cement Cretan alliance. Theseus married her, weaving yet another political thread. Unaware goddess Aphrodite had knotted it with personal revenge. She inflamed Phaedra with forbidden urge for stepson Hippolytus. Hippolytus, chaste devotee of Artemis, recoiled. Phaedra, spiraling between shame and eros, penned false accusation of assault before hanging herself in palace linen storeroom. Theseus read the missive, rage eclipsing reason, and invoked a dormant boon from Poseidon, father or benefactor, myths vary, to punish the boy. As Hippolytus drove chariot along Saronic shore, a bull of brine erupted, horns hammering surf. Horses panicked, reins tangled, wheels shattered, body dragged until breath fled. Only then did Artemis materialize before Theseus, revealing deception. Grief wrenched King's spine. Memory of Aegis's leap returned, fathers doomed to kill by misjudgment. Menestius exploited sorrow, rallying houses weary of blood-tinted legends. Theseus, stripped of allies, slipped away aboard a single pentaconter to Skyros, seeking old comrade Lycomedes for asylum. But kings fear claimant charisma. On a cliff climb to gaze at sea's bruised blue, Lycomedes shoved him. Theseus plummeted, armorless, into ragged surf that once swallowed his father. Some fishermen claimed dolphins bore the body to Poseidon's hall. Most saw only broken bones bleaching on rocks until gulls cleaned them ivory white. Athens mourned slowly. Generations later, Oracle commanded Caemon to retrieve heroes' bones for Persian war morale. Searching Skyros, he found colossal remains, a broken bronze spearhead nearby. Relics sailed home. Crowds wept at arrival, as if history's overdue breath had finally exhaled. They built the Theseon, part shrine, part courtroom, where slaves could claim sanctuary, perhaps echo of heroes' constant rescue of the imperiled. Each year, youths raced torch relays through streets, reenacting labors. One runner hefted dummy boar tusk, another brandished mock club, weaving civic pride into childhood memory. Theseus's legacy became Athens' mirror, brilliance twinned with brittle judgment. He birthed democratic seed by fusing Attica, yet personal appetites, Ariadne abandoned, Amazon stolen, underworld hubris, reminded citizens to temper ambition with deliberation. Tragedians mind his paradox. Euripides' Hippolytus mourns father curse. Sophocles' lost Theseus likely weighed statesmen against exile. Today, archaeologists in Plaka district sometimes unearth black glazed kylixes painted with a lean youth, wrestling a sinewy brigand. Every museum placard tells part of story, but clay cannot convey cedar-scent breath of Isthmian dawn, or the snap of pine as Sinis was whipped skyward. Marathon's plain still grows lank grasses where Amazon shields once dented earth. Night breeze there carries, some say, a faint hoofbeat echo. Either Antiope's charger or Hippolytus's doomed mare. Syntagma Square athletes practicing dodecathlon turn to sprint drills and whisper ostisevs, like Theseus, meaning launch with mind as sharp as blade, body as adaptable as thread. In legal amphitheatres, litigants cite Thesion precedent that even kings answer to communal law. And when young tourists stand on Sunian cliff, staring where two Aegean deaths inked one saga, guides remind them sails change colour with a single lapse of memory. So the thread Ariadne gave still unspools, a line from labyrinth to modern alleyways where citizens debate and lovers choose or refuse admonitions of gods. It teaches that freedom earned by cunning requires constant rewinding to guide others out of darkness, that heroism without humility circles back as exile, and that every city rising from fractured hamlets needs at least one soul audacious enough to challenge monsters, external or inner, then brave enough to face the consequences when hubris turns path to precipice. In evening hush, if you trace Acropolis steps when wind tangles olive branches just so, you might swear the stone beneath your sandal flexes, echoing the weight of a youth once striding home under black sail, unaware that every clever knot he'd tied would one day test its strength on the loom of history he helped warp. Idas, the spear that challenged sun and thunder. A soft wind rolls through the Messenian plain every dawn, smelling of crushed oregano and fresh split fig. The peasants call it the Horos breath, saying it decides which rows of barley bend first and which wrestle back. On the morning Idas was born, the wind slammed the palace shutters so hard they clapped like wooden cymbals, and a midwife cried out that Ares himself must be prowling the corridors. King Aphareus laughed and told her to hush. Still, when he lifted his son, flakes of shattered shutter paint drifted across the infant's brow like battlefield ash. They would not be the last. Idas grew big the way storms do, quietly gathering until one looks up and finds the horizon swallowed by bruise-coloured clouds. At 8, he hauled a bull calf from a flooded ditch, while other boys fetched ropes. By 12, he twisted iron nails into shapes of griffin talons, just to see if iron could be persuaded as easily as willow twigs. King Aphareus had smiths fashion a spear suited to those broad hands. Ash haft thick as ship's mast, bronze head hammered to a keel-sharp crescent. Idas named it Thorgilos, storm gouge, and took to carrying it even on strolls through the orchard, where he practiced thrusting at pears until trees surrendered their fruit in showers. Yet it was not strength alone that marked him. When harpists played at dusk, Idas sat cross-legged, eyes half shut, following tunes as if charting enemy movements. Once, unbidden, he corrected an aging bard's fingering on a Phrygian mode, pointing out that the flat third should linger like a held breath. The bard blushed. King Aphareus later told his son a spear can miss by a hair, and so can a string. Idas nodded, storing the lesson alongside muscle memory. 2 winters later, a sister was born in Sparta to Tyndareus, Clytemnestra, destined for sorrow, and her twin Helen, destined for every song. Messengers carried gossip of baby beauty bright as polished amber. Idas listened, intrigued, but shrugged. Beauty neither felled stags nor hammered iron. What stirred him more was the arrival of a frail yet keen-eyed cousin, Lynceus, son of Aphareus's brother Arene. Lynceus could spot eagles nesting on cliffs, invisible to regular men. Together they became the Messenian twins, mirroring Castor and Polydeuces across Taygetus. Lynceus planned paths through dense cedar. Idas cleared them with storm-gouge thrusts. Their first legend sparked on Mount Taygetus. A rogue boar, hide-scarred by failed hunts, had begun trampling vineyards at night, tusks puncturing amphorae left to ferment under moonlight. Aphareus promised a garland of gold figs to whoever returned the beast's head. Idas and Lynceus climbed before dawn, Lynceus reading dew slices on grass to find the boar's wallow, Idas bracing spear. When they found it, red eyes glaring from thorn shadow, Lynceus loosed an arrow into the flank, more distraction than wound. The boar lunged. Idas met charge with a downward thrust, catching skull between tusks. The bronze head sheared bone, tusks cracked like overripe pomegranates. As they hauled the carcass downhill, blood staining their calves, Idas laughed that Lynceus's vision had felled the beast before his spear did. Lynceus laughed back, claiming even the sky would bend eventual knee to Idas's lunging steel. The seed of challenge took root. The twins matured among Messenian oaks and rumour. Wrestlers refused to grapple Idas. Archers refused distant wagers with Lynceus. Yet both strangers and gods keep track of meteors ascending too fast. One spring the Olympian Games announced extended foot races and new chariot heats. Idas entered not to win, victory felt expected, but to measure coastal kings rumoured fierce. He won hammer throw by 10 strides, discus by 15, but the chariot heat proved knotty. Castor of Sparta drove sleek mares gifted by Tyndareus, wheels sculpted like dolphin flukes, Polyjuice rode bareback, flicking slingstones at pylons, winking even as dust haloed his curls. Idas's team, though strong, lacked polish. His cart skidded on a curve, and he placed third. Castor leaped from his chariot and clasped Idas's wrist anyway, praising raw power. Polydeuces offered a wineskin. For a twilight these four men, paired by fate, shared bread under a fig tree, telling jokes about cranky seers and covetous centaurs. But laughter is brittle when destiny loosens its seams. At that feast, Edith's gaze locked on Phoebe, one of the Leucipides, daughters of Theseus, priest-king famed for oaths. Phoebe's braids glowed sunlit copper, and when she smiled she crinkled one eye as though in a perpetual secret. Lynceus noticed his cousin's stare, chuckled, yet also found his own breath snared by Phoebe's twin, Hilera, gentle as dusk haze. Castor and Polydeuces exchanged glances. They too had long savoured whispers of the Leucipides' grace. The seeds of rivalry sprouted beside empty wine cups. Weeks later, Tyndareus announced betrothal of Phoebe and Hilera to Castor and Polydeuces. Messengers bore olive wreaths to Messenia, courtesy gestures masking triumph. Ida's laughed so loudly, Stormgouge quivered against the wall. He would not yield love to men who, though noble, did not know a boar's eyes glinting through thorn at midnight. Lynceus, reluctant yet loyal, vowed to stand by his cousin's claim. Their plan was simple, as warfare often is. Ride at dusk to Sparta, sweep the sisters onto a chariot, and outrun any pursuers. Lynceus charted orchard lanes broad enough to gallop. Idas prepared horses fed barley steeped in honey mead for strength. When the day came, clouds stacked like walls along Taygetus, muffling sunset flare. Lynceus guided them through vine terraces, silent wheels over loam. In the courtyard, Phoebe and Hilera practiced lyre duets under olive lanterns. The twins lunged. Hilera shrieked as Lynceus lifted her. Phoebe swung a lyre at Idas's helm, but missed. Guards shouted. Idas lashed the horses. Hooves churned dust, crossing the Euripides fords before Spartan phalanx mobilized. Word reached Castor and Polydeuces within the hour. They spurred war horses, each string of curses trailing broken-hearted fear. At twilight's edge, 4 riders thundered across Laconia's scrub, 2 armed with spears, 2 with desperation. When dawn gilded Messenian fields, Lynceus's keen sight spotted Spartan plumes not 8 stadia behind. Idas urged speed. The horses foamed. At the Alpheus crossing, cart shuddered. Phoebe slid, nearly tumbling. Idas caught her with one arm, reins in the other. Stormgouge stood ready across his thighs for confrontation he now saw unavoidable. They chose to fight on Ephorius's estate meadow, wide enough for spear charge, near a stand of oak where wind muttered. Phoebe and Hilera deposited beneath a myrtle, eyes wide with identical dread, watched as 4 men faced off, eyes like eclipses. Castor challenged Lynceus, while Polydeuces leapt at Idas, fists rather than spears, hoping to quell murder under bruises. Spears flashed, fists hammered, dust spiraled. Lynceus, lighter but quick, parried Castor's thrusts until a feint split his leather corselet, scraping ribs. Idas saw crimson, roared, and flung Polydeuces aside. He closed on Castor, Stormgouge singing a note that had ended many boars. One thrust pierced Spartan breastplate, blooming blood like spilled wine. Polydeuces wailed. Lynceus's arrow grazed Polydeuces' cheek before misfortune turned. Polydeuces, famed boxer, smashed Lynceus's temple with bronze-weighted glove. Lynceus fell, sight extinguished. 2 bodies now stained grass. Phoebe wept till voice cracked. Hilera fainted. Polydeuces cradled Castor, calling on Zeus the father. But Zeus deferred to his son Apollo, and Apollo carried the half-divine Castor's soul halfway skyward. Polydeuces begged to share brother's fate. Zeus split immortality. One twin in sky, one on earth, alternating days. Yet the father of gods also heard Phoebe's ragged pleas for her Locrian love not be judged solely by spear. So Zeus weighed frenzy and fidelity and pronounced, Idas, though mortal, shall taste the kind of reckoning only gods inflict. His next triumph will invite unrivaled peril. Grief-drunk and wounded, Idas carried Lynceus' body home, followed by Phoebe leading silence. King Aphareus, torn between paternal pride and pearl-deep sorrow, ordered funeral pyres that burned 3 nights, one for Lynceus, one for Castor, one for the bond of friendship that once brushed future but now lay ash. When ashes cooled, Idas stood on palace steps, hair unbound, storm gouge upright like gravestone, and swore oath. To claim a trophy so bold gods themselves must bow acknowledgment. He would chase the Cairenian hind rumoured swifter than any arrow, and golden as dawn's first coin. Artemis's sacred pet. Few dared remind him Heracles still hunted that same hind. Fewer reminded him Apollo might defend a sister's creature. Idas merely smiled, heat in jade eyes. If gods denied him Phoebe's peace, he would outrun them to a glory ironclad beyond their whim. At first light, he saddled a roan stallion, kissed Phoebe's brow, and spurred north toward Arcadia's snowy ridges, where hoof-prints of gold supposedly sparkle by moon. Phoebe watched, hand on belly. Already she suspected a life brewed beneath grief. She whispered neither prayer nor caution, only the name Idas, letting each syllable trail breath like a kite string unspooling toward mountains. He rode all morning toward Arcadia, the roan's hooves puffing dust that glittered in first light like flecks of hammered gold. Each rhythm in the stallion's stride felt like a drum echoing Zeus's half-threat. Your next triumph will invite peril unrivaled. Idas welcomed the warning. Peril was the only coin equal to the price he had paid on that blood-soaked meadow. Storm gouge lay against his thigh. Its bronze head rang faintly whenever the horse changed gait, as though impatient for a quarry worthy of its edge. The Cairenian hind left traces no ordinary hunter could read. A single dew drop dangling unbroken from bent grass. A hoofprint so light it bruised moss, but never tore it. A fleeting shimmer where dawn caught the creature's golden hide. For 2 nights, Idas tracked those whispers across ravines draped with frost-killed fern. Lynceus's absence hurt here. His cousin's eyes would have seen the hind's every silent footfall, but grief sharpened Idas's other senses. He slept little, ate less, and let muscle memory chew fatigue. On the 3rd dawn, he crested a shale ridge and spotted it, standing in a pool of cloudlight between fir trunks, head bowed to sip from a melt-fed rill. The beast's coat glowed as if hammered from new coin. A single silver star gleamed between antlers. Idas drew breath, but the hind lifted its muzzle, ears twitching. Then, like wind-shaved flame, it bounded uphill. Idas spurred the roan, twisting through pine shadows so fast, needles whipped his cheeks raw. Mid-pursuit, thunder that was not thunder rolled ahead. A larger rider broke from fog. Heracles, lion skin streaming, bow already knocked. Tales said he'd chased the hind a year without snaring it. Now his barrel chest pumped like a smith's bellows. Idas wheeled beside him, roan matching the hero's Arcadian stallion stride for stride. "Back, Messenian," Heracles growled. "This is my labour." Ida's laughed, too loud for mountain hush. She who outran you 12 moons answers to no one yet. Try to match her yourself, not swat her from behind with arrows. Anger lit Heracles' eyes, but no time remained for words. The hind slipped between boulders into a gorge where horses could not follow. Both men leaped to earth, sprinting after. Idas felt the old electricity of speed surge, sinews remembering orchard drills, storm gouged light in his grip. He darted over scree while Heracles crashed behind like a landslide. The gorge narrowed into a slot where waterfall mist hung in spinning suns. There the hind paused, trapped between rock walls and a plunge into white torrent. Heracles shouldered forward, bowstring creaking. Idas slid in front, raising spear butt to block. One arrow might pierce her flank, spoil the hide, Idas warned. Better the hide than your throat, Heracles answered. Thunder cracked, real this time. A blue-white blaze struck the rock above, splitting it. Both heroes staggered as Artemis stepped from the smoke, silver bow aloof, moon-cold glare fixed on storm gouge. The hind knelt at her sandaled feet like spilled sunlight. Children quarrel, she said, voice double-layered like wind through copper pipes, and mortal thunder trespasses further than divine lightning. Heracles dropped a knee, admitting guilt. His labour demanded capture alive, yet he had aimed to kill. Idas kept standing, knees locked by equal parts awe and defiance. I seek not trophy, he said, only redemption. Artemis's gaze flicked to the stain on his spear. Castor's blood, still dark in graven runes. Redemption is a quarry far swifter than any hind. Before Idas could reply, Apollo strode into gorge mouth, lyre slung, arrows gleaming like noon. Swift words from a slower mind, he mocked. I spared that cousin of yours a painless death. You repay by stalking my sister's companion. Lightning again, but this bolt was Apollo's glare. Idas swung storm gouge, tip sparking air. Heracles tried to mediate, palm lifted, but gods relish escalations. Apollo levelled his bow. Idas lunged, trusting the only creed he had left. Speed outruns consequence. Arrow whistled, spear flashed, thunder answered. Zeus's promised peril arrived as a sheet of blinding white. When vision cleared, Heracles knelt over Idas's body. Storm gouge lay split in two. Bronze head fused to melted granite. Apollo withdrew his arrow, fletching smoking, but unbroken. Artemis stroked the hind, whispering until it shimmered and dissolved into mist. Then she touched Idas's chest. Breath fluttered, but eyes remained shut. His final triumph stands, she said coolly. He reached a place beyond mortal spears, a place where even gods must weigh fairness. Apollo, chastened yet proud, knelt opposite Heracles. Then weigh this, he urged Zeus unseen. Let his soul race no farther than the winds he worshipped. Clouds rumbled assent. The earth under Idas's corpse softened. A narrow fissure yawned, cradling him. Rock folded, leaving only a low ridge striped red and silver, the colours of blood and moon metal. Artemis gathered both halves of storm gouge, set them crossing like broken constellations, and whispered a course for their iron. Melt in Hephaestus's forge, be reshaped into ploughshares for Messenians who knew grief. Apollo slung his bow in silent agreement. Heracles shouldered the cracked spearhead remains and trudged back toward Eurystheus, calculating how to recount a labour shared with fallen pride. Days later, Phoebe dreamed of lightning carving her husband's outline into mountain stone. When messengers confirmed his death, She did not wail. She walked to the sea cliffs, spread a red cloak for the coming child, and taught herself the lullaby Lynceus once sang about hawks who fly until the sky forgives them. In Messenia, farmers received unexpected gifts. Bronze plowshares stamped with twin antlers. When they tilled soil, grain sprouted double. They carved tiny hind figurines to set in furrows, offering thanks to Artemis and, quietly, to Idas, whose weapon now parted earth not skull. Years later, the Dioscuri, alternately skybound and underworld-bound, observed from constellation heights. Polydeuces, immortal half, admitted that Idas's final charge erased some bitterness. Castor, during his day back on Earth, visited Phoebe and the child, named Erup, feather-light and fierce-eyed. He left a bridle woven of star threads, promising swift sure-footedness for whatever road she'd choose. Apollo hung Idas's cracked spear butt in the western sky, a faint pair of red stars after sunset. Astronomers call them Oileus's chase, but Locrians know better. When those stars flicker, fishermen pour a trickle of wine seaward, murmuring the caution their grandmothers taught. Speed, without reverence, turns spear to lightning. Yet fields bright with doubled barley whisper a softer addendum. Devotion, once humbled, can turn lightning's ruins into harvest for generations unborn. So the tale resolves where storms first brewed, between salt wind and fig scent on Messenian mornings. Children racing across dew-slick orchards test their legs, then pause to pick a fallen spear-shaped twig. They spin it, imagining gods above and shadows below, learning, long before words, that every thrust toward glory threads through thunder, and that the bravest stride is neither first nor fastest, but the one that kneels when sky and earth clash, planting hope where weapons once struck. Perseus, storm-born slayer of Gorgon night. Rain rarely graced Argos in late spring, yet on the night Danae conceived her son, clouds poured silver torrents so dense that the palace porticos quaked under their weight. King Acrisius should have been grateful. Grain fields begged for moisture, but dread gnawed him. Months earlier, the Pythia had murmured a prophecy. Your daughter's womb will house your end. Desperate to defy fate, Acrisius cast Danae into a bronze chamber sunk beneath the rear keep, sealed by a stone too heavy for 10 men. Guards posted above heard only the drip of rain and, oddly, the faint hum of wind that sounded like drawn harp strings. Danae, prisoner of paternal fear, passed solitary hours weaving cloth that would never see sun. On this storm night, lightning split a hole in the sky, and through that rent descended Zeus, not in bull form nor swan, but a cascade of raw light, molten aureate droplets that pooled around Danae, lifting dust motes into miniature galaxies. The bronze walls glowed amber, the floor trembled, and within that luminous torrent God and woman mingled. When dawn returned, the walls dimmed to dull metal, and Danae found her belly warmed by a pulse not her own. She named the child before his first kick, Perseus, he who strikes. Though whether she imagined strikes against destiny, monsters, or tyranny, even she could not say. Acrisius felt prophecy tighten like a noose at first sight of her rounded stomach. In panic, he ordered craftsmen to drive rivets from Danae's bronze chamber, haul her blinking into sunlight, then shutter her and the infant inside a cedar chest, lined with pitch. Without ceremony, the chest was rolled over Argive cliffs into a sea whipped white by remnants of the storm that had begun it all. Fishermen watching from shore crossed themselves, noting how the box did not bob, but carved through waves like a sacrificial coin flung to Poseidon. For 2 days the chest drifted. Danae, half conscious, shielded Perseus from brine seeping between planks, singing lullabies learned in girlhood, verses about swallows nesting under eaves, lines she hoped would nest in her son's bones. On the third dawn, a gull pierced the sky foam stillness with raucous cry. Landfall. Seriphos, an island less fretted by gods, known for basalt cliffs and fishing nets bleached linen white. Nets belonging to Dictys, brother of the island's ruler Polydectes. Dictys hauled chest aboard, pried lid, and beheld 2 sets of ocean-bright eyes. He treated mother and child as castaways kissed by divinity. Word of golden rain travelled quickly among island gossipers, but halted at Polydectes' threshold. There, rumour fermented into desire. Years swept by like tide over rocks. Perseus grew under Dictys' cottage roof, where salt-crusted windowsills and fishing rigs scented the air. He learned to twist rope, gut mackerel, and read the underside of gull wings for storm signs. Danae taught letters by scribing alphabets in the sand, while Perseus traced them with fingertip until surf erased, so he would remember by heart. Every evening Dictys tossed a weighted stone into the shallows and timed Perseus's dive to retrieve it. Eventually, the boy surfaced with rock in one hand and a fish speared by driftwood in the other. Stormborn, Dictys would mutter with wonder, seeing lightning's echo in the child's gap-toothed grin. Polydectes watched from the citadel balcony. He saw Danae's beauty ripen into ageless grace, saw Perseus's shoulders broaden, already hinting at demigod sinew. When Perseus turned 16, the king engineered a banquet in honour of Hippodamia's far-off betrothal, demanding each islander present equine gifts. Fisherfolk who owned no horses squirmed. Perseus, protective of his mother and foster father, offered what he could, a promise to fetch any gift Polydectes named. The king smiled the way a shark shows gratitude. "Bring me the head of Medusa, Gorgon of Blackshore night," he said, an impossible quest meant to remove obstacles while he pressed Danae into marriage. Dictys protested. Danae trembled. Perseus, blood quick with youthful inevitability, accepted. That night he stared into charcoal embers, imagining serpents for hair, petrifying gazes, and wing beats heavy as doom. Fear visited, but could not unpack its bags. There was simply no space in his chest next to certainty that fate, once bestowed, awaited meeting, not avoidance. Yet fate does not abandon those it commissions. As Perseus paced the moonlit beach, 2 figures appeared where surf curled. Athena, eyes steel blue like sky before hail, and Hermes, sandals aflutter with subtle breeze. Athena gifted a burnished shield newer than sunrise, polished to mirror pitch. "Let reflection meet reflection," she said, "so stone becomes myth." Hermes offered an adamantine sickle, edges fused from mountain thunderstorms, metal that even gods respected. Last, he taught passwords to reach the grey, sisters sharing one eye, who alone knew where Gorgons nested. Perseus outfitted for departure, copper cuirass hammered thin for flight, sandals strengthened with whalebone, and his mother's protective whisper braided into wrist cords. He sailed to the mainland on a fishing skiff, hugging islands until Triton's conch echoed from promontories older than language. Arriving in Thessalian marshland where fog hung like old wool, he found the grey, 3 crones seated around a stone bowl, passing between them one scarlet eye. Approaching unseen thanks to wing sandals, Hermes released last minute. Perseus snatched the shared eye mid-hand off, holding it hostage at arm's length. In exchange for its return, the grey spat directions in ragged unison. Beyond ocean's western curve, where night begins before evening ends, lies the island of Sarpedon. There Gorgons dream in serpent lullabies. Armed now with guidance, Perseus sought the Hesperides for tools to survive that night-wound shore. Their garden floated on a horizon like mirage, apples gold as denial. Nymphs, cousins to both ruin and redemption, greeted him with half-smiles. They bestowed a sack woven of moonbeams, kibisis, capable of containing even nightmare. They led him to a clearing where a pair of sandals winged from willow leaves rested, along with a helmet wrought of dogskin, yet glowing with chameleonic hues, Hades' cap of invisibility stolen briefly from funeral vaults for heroic loan. Perseus thanked them, though his knees quivered at weight of borrowed divine property. With these items he turned westward, crossing echelons of dusk few living have measured. Winged sandals lifted him above cumulonimbus anvils, where thunder wandered forming and unforming. He charted by star groups seldom visible to Aegean farmers, the crooked staff, the silent yew, constellations reserved for travellers who run edges of world tapestry. Nights he slept little, hovering above sea that shifted from indigo to glassy black. Days he glided just under cloud cover, shield strapped to back, helmet stowed, sickle sheathed. Finally Sarpedon rose, a basalt platform jutting from endless night-haunted water. Shoreline littered with statues contorted in last dread. Sailors, sea lions, even gull mid-screech, all calcified. Air tasted of copper and gardenia, flowers grown in grotto gloom. Perseus slipped on Hades' helm. World blurred as though he stepped sideways out of presence. Breathing shallow, he advanced through stone labyrinths, where every wall bore reliefs of mortals immortalized by terror. In the inner grotto Medusa slept, head cradled on forearms. Snakes susurrated lullaby, forked tongues sampling dreams. Athena's shield turned outward, reflected moonlight stolen through fissures. Perseus angled it, inch by inch, until the mirrored vista captured Medusa's visage without direct line of sight. Snakes awoke first, hissing at unseen shift of shadows. Medusa's lids fluttered. Perseus froze. Mirror image trembled but held. With left hand he drew Hermes' sickle. With right he clutched kibisis open like a mouth waiting to swallow fate. One breath. Second breath. Stroke. The sickle hissed, metal slicing serpentine hair and mortal neck alike. A fountain of black ichor sprayed, sparks of gold swirling inside. The head tumbled into kibisis. He cinched the sack as newborn Pegasus burst from corpse, a winged horse snorting starlight, followed by brother Chrysa brandishing a newborn sword. These miracles curved into sky before Perseus could blink. He strapped kibisis tight, bile rising at sharp stench of Gorgon blood smoke that melted cavern floor. Outside, dawn threatened horizon. Gorgon sisters Euryale and Stheno shrieked behind him, wakeful at kin's death. Invisible under Hades' helm, Perseus flew, heart rate drumming hexameter. He ascended into a sky that pinked at eastern edge, not daring to remove the cap until storm clouds swallowed him. Below, Sarpedon shrank, shriek echoes ebbing. His quest half finished, returning to Seriphos awaited. Over Libyan sands he lost bearing, Gorgon blood dripping through sack holes where blade had nicked cloth. Each drop sprouted serpents. Desert slither filled behind him, causing future travellers to name regions snake-scourged. In that heat he saw mirage. A woman chained to rock, foam whipping shoulders, eyes wide with terror as sea monster neared. A new verse began writing itself in Perseus's destiny, one he had not studied nor requested, but heroism seldom sticks to script. Winds that had once smelled of brine now carried the iron tang of Gorgon blood, as Perseus flew south along Africa's ochre rim, each drop leaking through the nicked weave of the Kibisis, spawned writhing vipers that thrashed in newborn panic, then slithered away to haunt desert nomads for millennia. Night approached like a curtain of hot ink, and he angled westward in search of cooler currents. When he reached the edge of Atlas's garden, a crescent of impossible green amid scorched earth, he saw the Titan King himself towering over orchards of golden apples. Atlas, determined no mortal eye behold those fruits, brandished a trunk-sized club. Perseus, unwilling to test divine sinew, revealed Medusa's head with a twist of the sack. Stone skinned the Titan in a heartbeat. Mountains erupted from calcifying muscle. At dawn, shepherds would name the range Atlas and navigate by its petrified sternum. But destiny waited eastward, on a desolate promontory where breakers roared like war drums against basalt. A silhouette emerged, a woman chained by wrists and ankles, silk torn by salt wind. Sea spray haloed her hair so it sparkled like seawater beneath starlight. Perseus drew closer, cloak snapping. She turned, terror and awe coalescing in obsidian eyes. "I am Andromeda, daughter of Cepheus and Cassiopeia," she said above surf thunder. Her voice trembled yet held melodic clarity. "My mother boasted I surpassed Nereids in beauty. Poseidon sent the monster Ketos as penalty. Only this sacrifice can halt its hunger." Even as she spoke, waves convulsed, and the sea beast emerged, body like scaled canyon, jaws crescented with tusk rows. Fishermen in distant boats screamed, oars snapping as they fled. Perseus, hovering, weighed options. The Gorgon head promised sure victory, but risked petrifying Andromeda. He chose cunning. He dived toward a cluster of jagged rocks jutting from the shallows, their tips slick with algae. There he shed the helm, cunning invisible shifting to visible valor, and hurled himself skyward to meet Ketos. Hermes' adamantine sickle met hide harder than storm-forged bronze. Sparks fanned across evening gloom. The beast whipped its tail, churning a maelstrom, but Perseus used winged sandals to vault from eddy to air, each leap carving wounds across dorsal ridges. Finally, when Ketos reared to swallow him whole, Perseus plunged into that gaping throat, embedding the sickle to the hilt in the soft palate. He kicked away, wings drumming, and the monster convulsed, green blood frothing with brine. With a final groan that shook seabed stones into new shoals, it sank, currents tinting turquoise with defeat. He freed Andromeda, whose wrists bore raw welts. She looked upon him, sweat-streaked, ichor spattered, and saw not God, but storm-steeled mortal. Led by tide-drenched soldiers, Cepheus and humbled Cassiopeia arrived with torches. They offered half the kingdom and Andromeda's hand. Perseus accepted only the latter, lips softening after years of salt solitude. The wedding feast glimmered under cedar lanterns, yet one man's eyes smouldered darker than unlit pitch. Phineus, Andromeda's former betrothed. He crashed the banquet with spear and cohort, claiming theft of rightful bride. Perseus tried parley. Phineus answered with bronze. In crowded hall melee raged, pillars cracked, and blood spattered tapestry. When a stray spear targeted Andromeda, Perseus's patience broke. He whipped out Medusa's head, turning Phineus and conspirators into an army of ash-grey statuary, hundreds of cautionary pillars among which future pilgrims wove garlands. The king ordered mosaic floors of their shattered fragments. a pavement reminding feet to tread lightly with oaths. But Perseus's oath to his mother still tugged. With Andromeda astride Pegasus behind him, he soared to Seriphos. Years of absence had curdled Polydectes' desire into tyranny. He had seized Danae, compelling marriage by threat against Dictys. In the throne hall, the king mocked Perseus's talk of Gorgons. The hero unveiled proof. Polydectes' sneer froze mid-curl. Courtiers rigidified mid-suppliant bend. Only Dictys, eyes lowered in reverence, survived. Perseus installed him as benevolent ruler, repositioned Medusa's head on Athena's aegis per goddess instruction, then sailed for Argos, where prophecy awaited closure. Acrisius, having heard tales of a storm-bright grandson, fled to Larissa to avoid fated death. Perseus pursued not vengeance but paternal reconciliation, seeking to show he bore no murderous intention. Fate, deaf to reason, staged its convergence at Larissa's funeral games honoring King Teutamides' father. Competitors hurled quoit-shaped discs into offshore wind. Perseus, newly minted champion, entered for sport. His discus, too light by a fraction, caught a rogue gust, veered into spectators, and struck Acrisius on the temple. The old king collapsed. Blood darkened sand. Recognition dawned only in hindsight, as Perseus knelt over the man, realizing prophecy had navigated every detour. Grief was brief. Acrisius had cast him to sea, but Perseus felt the sinister precision of destiny. He refused Argive crown, gifting it to Megapenthes, Acrisius's nephew, and founded instead the citadel of Mycenae on a rocky promontory where floods never reached. There he and Andromeda raised 7 sons and a daughter, lineages seeding both Heraclids and Perseids. He enshrined Hermes' sickle and Hades' helm beneath limestone altar, acknowledging that tools of gods outlast mortal grip. As decades wheeled, Perseus and Andromeda ascended from governance to legend. When winter colds knifed through olive groves, grandparents maneuvered children outside to watch starlight. They traced 2 names: Perseus, sword held against cosmic dark, and Andromeda, spread in perpetual rescue. Between them twinkled Cepheus and Cassiopeia, still half-chained by vainglory. Eyes of budding sailors followed those constellations across Aegean black, believing heroes anchored heavens so mortals might navigate seas. Even Medusa's head, once lethal icon, grew into a Potropaic emblem, etched on shields, coins, and temple thresholds to repel evil. Stonecutters carving the first Parthenon Gorgonian whispered thanks to Perseus for converting terror into safeguard. Coils lopped from serpent hair became medicinal in myth. Dried powders to treat snakebite, though charlatans often sold forged slag instead. In the twilight of his reign, Perseus visited Delphi with eldest son Perses. He asked if any mortal could outfly fate. The Pythia replied, "Fate is shoreline. You may chart open sea, yet waves still melt into sand." He accepted, feeling the gravity of years anchor flesh. One dawn, Athena came as osprey, beckoning him skyward. On Pegasus they climbed until mortal blood could no longer withstand rare air. Body shed, spirit fused with stardust, he took place alongside Andromeda in heaven's tapestry, sword forever raised, not in violence, but in illumination, cutting a swath of constellations through darkness. Back on Earth, Dictys ruled Seriphos with nets, not spears. Universities taught astronomy beginning with the Perseid meteor shower, and bards sung that every August those meteors are sparks from Perseus's swinging blade, reminding mortals that monsters can fall, tyrants petrify, and even exile chests cast into the sea may land on shores where kindness waits. Thus ends the arc of the Stormborn, from bronze prison to sky pedestal, threaded by humility despite divine pedigree. Whenever you hold a mirror to signal rescue across distance, or read letters hammered on bronze, remember a fisher boy who dived for weighted stones and in doing so, trained to snatch a single shared eye from fate, adjusting the glare just long enough for humanity to glimpse itself victorious over dread. Atalanta, swift-foot daughter of Arcadian pines. A chill dawn lingered over Mount Parthenian when a midwife wrapped an Arcadian infant in goatskin and carried her toward the eastern crags, an errand ordered by the newborn's father, King Theseus, who had begged the gods for a son and interpreted a daughter as disfavor. Wind combed the pine tops into mournful susurrus as the servant laid the child on a flat slab of limestone still silvered with night frost. Moments later she fled, feet scraping scree, afraid to witness wolves finish the king's decree. But no wolves came. Parthenian's resident nymphs, once courtiers of Artemis herself, watched from tree shadows. They felt the earth hum with something unusual. The girl's tiny heart pounded not with panic, but with a focus echoing the mountain's own ancient rhythm. When daylight tilted across the slab, a she-bear, eyes amber, gait deliberate, emerged from thicket. She sniffed the bundle, huffed warm breath, and lay down. The nymphs exhaled. From that hour the bear nursed the infant beside her cubs, sharing thick milk laced with forest sage. By moonrise the child crawled along the den, already testing limbs against stone. Seasons revolved. The little foundling learned to run before speech, toes hardened by pine needles. She devoured acorns and raw honey and listened to nymphs reciting star lore while braiding cedar sprigs into her wild hair. When spring floods burst canyon streams, she balanced on slick logs as nymphs wagered how long she'd stay upright. She never fell, though her knuckles sometimes bled from clenching. They named her Atalanta, balanced, for she moved with centered certainty, as if gravity bargained with her rather than commanded. Adolescence reshaped her frame into lean sculpture. She stitched a tunic of stag hide. At 15, she outran jackals 6 strides before they realized prey had reversed roles. Artemis, hearing devotion in each arrow loosed toward sky for nothing but grace of flight, granted Atalanta a bow of polished yew and a quiver charmed so feathers never frayed. In return, the girl vowed chastity, binding a white boar tusk pin into her hair as emblem of free-roaming kinship with the goddess. Word of Arcadia's uncatchable huntress drifted across the Peloponnese, much like smoke from summer brush fires, slow, unstoppable. Some storytellers embellished. She could outsprint a sunbeam, wrestle centaurs, drink lion's blood without grimace. While most boasts sprouted from wonder, one rooted in truth. Before she reached 20, 2 centaurs, Rucus and Hylaeus, attempted to overpower her near the Ladon River. She skewered both with a single arrow each, throats pierced so neatly, blood spurted in parallel arcs that met mid-air, forming a brief crimson X. Local shepherds arriving after found her cleaning arrowheads with measured calm, not triumph. The tale reached King Oeneus of Calydon, just as Artemis's monstrous boar ripped through his orchards. When summons for champions rang, Atalanta descended Parthenian, lion skin cloak tossed over one shoulder, footsteps light as cornflower petals. Upon arrival in Calydon's courtyard, she confronted a symposium of male heroes, rugged Ancaeus, towering Heracles, sleek-browed Castor and Polydeuces, and, most significant, Prince Meleager, whose ember-bright eyes widened at her stride's quiet assurance. Whispers churned, a woman among boar hunters. Some scoffed, others, eyeing her bear-claw necklace, chose silence. Meleager insisted she join. His uncles Plexippus and Toxius protested, spitting dogma about kitchen crafts. Meleager's rebuttal was a laugh that rang like steel struck cleanly. When your spear arms mirror her quiver tally, object again. None could. Thus the hunt rode out at dawn, hoofbeats drumming frost-coated meadow. Atalanta jogged beside hounds, refusing horseback. She read forest clues others missed. A broken fern stem at boar tusk height, scat laced with acorn husks, fresh this morning. When the beast erupted, a mountain of bristles and rage, heroes hurled spears. Atalanta leaped sideways and fired. Her arrow sliced the boar's right ear, first blood. In the chaos, Meleager drove twin javelins behind foreleg. Ancaeus was gored. Castor dragged him clear. When the boar thudded dead, hornets swarmed its wound like black punctuation. Meleager, drenched in gore, awarded Atalanta the hide and tusks. That gesture cracked male ego like thin ice. Plexippus and Toxius lunged, blades bare. Meleager, loyal to merit not bloodline, slew them sleeker than grief could register. Calydon's victory soured in fratricide, but Atalanta's renown bloomed. She returned to Arcadia bearing hide that still smelled of pine sap and iron-rich death. Craftsmen tanned it into a sleeveless cuirass, fitted perfectly to her shoulders. Every future arrow would pass above the boar's scarred brow stitched at the chest. Yet destiny rarely allows long repose. On an autumn afternoon, Atalanta rescued 2 travellers ambushed by bandits near Tegea. They proved to be priests of Apollo, and in gratitude they invited her to Delphi to consult Pythia. Curious, she went. The oracle's eyes, milky with myrrh vapour, fixed upon her and delivered a riddle. Run the measure of love against wind. If wind prevails, flame will follow. Atalanta frowned. Cryptic divination no match for tangible sinew of speed. Returning, she discovered Arcadia abuzz. King Shonius, some tales say Iasus after remorse, had learned of her exploits and now sought marital alliance to amplify kin prestige. Atalanta declared she would marry only a man who could outrun her in open race. Losers must forfeit life. She believed no suitor could match her storm-fostered cadence, thus preserving her Artemis vow. Word spread. Princes of Elis, Pylos, Sparta travelled north. Each confident youth grants exceptions to myth. 30 died across calendar year, their skulls mounted on teak spikes along racecourse, grisly mile markers warning hubris. Then arrived Hippomenes, an Argive youth descended from Poseidon, yet untested in hero ledgers. Unlike braggarts before, he spent nights watching Atalanta's stride, mapping her angles, noting how she saved momentum by leaning into turns. Before dawn of his trial, he prayed at Aphrodite's shrine, admitting desire yet fearing unworthiness. The goddess, amused by a man who sought help rather than boasting, gifted 3 golden apples from Hesperides' groves, instructing him to drop each at tactical moments. Race morning glowed with impending thunderstorm. Atalanta stamped one foot, stretching calf muscle braided like river cord. Hippomenes rolled the first apple into lane. Sunflare off gold snagged her peripheral vision. She hesitated, a maybe breath, then sprinted again. Second apple curved along track on downhill stretch. This time she glanced longer, curiosity shimmering. Thunder cracked overhead. Final apple tumbled near finish. Rain began. She paused. Some tales claim greed flickered. Others say divine compulsion clamped her ankles. Hippomenes crossed the line heartbeat ahead, collapsing into wet dust, chest heaving. She approached, not sword drawn, but eyes wide with mixture of relief and dread, vow constrained, wedding followed. Yet Artemis's signatory pin weighed heavier now, tugging at each braid twist. For a while marriage functioned, a duet of hunting mornings, shared venison, laughter echoing gorge walls. Aphrodite, expecting thanks offerings, received none. Gods tally courtesies. She seeded restlessness in newlyweds' marrow. During pilgrimage through Sibyl's shadowed grove, desire overran restraint. They coupled within temple precinct, sweat mingling with myrrh incense. Cybele, goddess of axial wildness, interrupted. In rage, she transmuted them into lions, animals ancient Greeks believed could never mate once domesticated, forced to pull goddesses' chariot. Eternal harness, eternal co-arched backs, incapable of forgetting their velocity, yet barred from racing wind on own terms. They did not feel fur sprout so much as hear the hush it made, a rush of wind internalized, as though every hair were a fledgling pine needle sighing into the world at once. Atalanta's first motion as a lioness was not rage or panic, but a lunge to keep balance beneath a body abruptly heavier fore than aft. Bronze anklets she had worn since girlhood snapped and rang on temple flagstones. Hippomenes beside her roared in equal astonishment, sound rolling from a throat newly vaulted like cathedral nave. Cybele, remote upon her marble dais, watched the pair's frantic swivels with eyes older than basalt, then clicked her tongue once. Two great silver cats loped from the shadows, slipped yokes from their shoulders, and padded away. The meaning was clear. The penalty would not merely transform, it would conscript. The new lions were fastened to the empty yoke. As the harness tightened, memories of human sinew tugging bowstrings flickered. There, then blurred beneath instinctive understanding of reins, traces, draft. The chariot's axle groaned. Cybele turned, and the first pull wrenched lives apart from every map they had ever known. Down forested ravines they hauled the goddess of wild rebirth, iron-shod wheels scything moss into spirals. Thunder bumped inside their chests as hearts recalibrated for feline cadence. Four-beat percussion, spine like whip and bow. Whenever the grade steepened, Atalanta pushed harder, shoulder muscles bunching beneath tawny coat, and found, to her horror and awe, that she could still outpace wind, only chained now to bronze and penance. Hippomenes matched stride yet never gained, as if some sliver of the old race still ran between them. Finishing line forever deferred. Months blurred into seasons of pilgrimage, Samothrace cliff temples, Lydian riverbanks, the red crags of Paphlagonia, where vultures turned circles like script in the sky. At every stop worshippers laid crocus and figs at Cybele's feet, whispering fierce deep devotion while gazing at the lion pair. Avatars of transgression, of passion unchecked. Children pointed, poets scrawled couplets, and somewhere inside the great cats, two human minds catalogued the way legend calcifies, while one still lives it. One winter in the Phrygian highlands, snow muffled all colour. Cybele unyoked her beast beside a cedar grove whose trunks hummed under wind like deep lyres. She withdrew into trance, leaving lions to pad among drifts. Atalanta pressed her muzzle to a crust of ice, tasting pine pitch beneath. She remembered, in a gust of almost painful clarity, nymphs plaiting cedar sprigs through her hair, and the bare den scent of milk and leaf rot. A growl, half whimper, rose in her throat. Hippomenes responded with a low rumble, a question. She traced paw in snow, glyph of the swift spiral track she once ruled. He chuffed agreement, then extended a claw and etched a golden apple oval. Between them, speech rekindled, albeit in symbols on melting parchment. They tested freedom nightly. Yokes came off at dusk, and lions wandered valley floors under argent moon. Atalanta discovered she could ascend sheer rock faster than mountain goats, claws sparking quartz. Hippomenes learned trout could be snagged mid-leap with a single swipe. Their partnership, once a race, then a marriage, then a shared sentence, tempered into something quieter. A choreography of survival, mutual grooming before dawn. Warm flanks pressed during hail squalls. The Artemis pin that had fixed Atalanta's braid long ago now lay fused to her pelt near the shoulder, a silver fleck catching starlight, a memory sewn into flesh. Years spilled. In Greece, mortals argued whether the huntress had been wronged or justly humbled. Arcadian girls secreted away to Parthenian's ridges still prayed to her name before foot races, tying white ribbons round thighs and letting hair fly loose in pledge of unclaimed autonomy. In Elis, trainers drilled Olympic sprinters to mimic the forward lean like Atalanta before the bend, even as priests cautioned them not to covet victory more than piety. Thus the human echoes of her footsteps stretched farther than any chariot route she plodded in captivity. Then came the journey to Troad during the blooming of anemones. Cybele's procession aimed for her oldest cliff altar, a ledge overlooking Hellespont, where stone lions centuries defaced still guarded broken stairs. As they climbed the hairpin trail, earth trembled with pre-storm electricity. Mid-ascent, an enormous landslide roared free. Boulders, cedar shards, whole tongues of saturated soil slicing downhill directly toward the goddess's entourage. The attending priests screamed, mules reared. Cybele lifted her hands, but no incantation could reroute 50 tons of rock. Atalanta reacted first. She lunged, pushing the goddess's chariot axle sideways so the pole wedged against an outcrop. Harness traces jerked Hippomenes, who pivoted, bracing hind paws, muscles straining until claws screeched on limestone. The blockage held barely a heartbeat, yet enough. The slide thundered past, spraying shards that grazed fur but did not shatter bones. 3 acolytes died. Sacred drums splintered, but Cybele's life was preserved by the tensile geometry of 2 felines chained in union. In the quiet aftermath, Cybele stepped from the chariot, gazing at her beasts. Pine dust powdered their flanks, blood oozed where shale had sliced. She placed a hand on each tawny brow, and warmth like summer noon radiated under their hides. Bones knotted self-repair, wounds knit. She spoke, not aloud, but in the marrow of their new skeletons. Debt has transferred into devotion. You owe nothing more. The yoke unlatched of its own accord, clattering onto shattered path rocks. Yet freedom posed a quandary. Decades in feline minds had rewired desire. Human memories glimmered like far-off constellations, but paws had learned different staccato truths. Cybele offered choice: reclaim human form or roam as lions under her evergreen protection until flesh expired naturally. Atalanta stretched, testing healed sinews, and felt earth's hum answer. She envisioned courtly rooms, the press of sandals on marble. Rooms too small, marble too slick for claws. Hippomenes brushed his mane against hers, golden apple memory glinting in green eyes. She realized they had grown into themselves anew. To shed fur would be to shed the history that had welded them. They dipped heads in acceptance of wild fate. Cybele blessed them with a final gift: understanding of every trail between Asia and Attica, so they could traverse kingdoms without fear. Then she ascended her repaired chariot, now pulled by bronze automaton lions Hephaestus had sent, and vanished into cedar-scent thundercloud. The liberated pair travelled a decade of seasons, ghosts along caravan routes. Traders told tales of twin lions appearing at dusk to flank lonely travellers, pacing until banded danger passed, then disappearing without maul or roar. Shepherd boys in Bithynia left bowls of goat's milk studded with mountain honey. In return, they found wolf scat pushed away from lamb pens. A nomad poet once woke to grizzled snout breathing gentle near campfire. At dawn, he wrote the hymn to Arcadian stars, the earliest surviving verse that champions a woman's right to race any suitor on her own terms. One winter, they reached Parthenian again. Snow hushed the forest. No human scent lingered. Atalanta prowled up familiar slope to a limestone slab, half buried by years of leaf drift. The very altar where stone spikes once displayed her defeated suitors' skulls. All weathered to dust, yet grooves remained like phantom fractions. She poured earth, unearthing a single fragment of ivory, perhaps jawbone of Plexippus. She nudged it into a crevice and covered it with loam, a gesture half prayer, half closure. Hippomenes roared softly. She turned. Below, on the open meadow, a band of Arcadian girls practiced sprints, overseen by an elderly priestess of Artemis. Snowflakes melted in their hair. Their sandaled feet kicked powder. Each wore white ribbons on calves. Their laughter, unburdened, floated upward. Atalanta's feline chest swelled with something fiercer than pride, vindication. She and her mates settled beneath the pines to watch until dusk, tails sweeping slow arcs over ancestral soil. Years later, hunters stumbling through that forest found two lion skeletons curled together beneath the oldest cedar, skulls touching, paws intertwined. Between them lay a tarnished silver boar tusk pin and 3 shriveled pods that might once have been golden apples. The skeletons were hauled to Tegea and mounted in the temple of Artemis. Pilgrims rubbed the pin for swiftness before stadium contests. Each summer, when the Nemean Games commence and women's stadium races echo with cheering, a warm updraft sometimes rattles those lion bones. Priests claim it is merely thermal shift. Runners believe it is Atalanta purring approval over every foot that flies untethered across Greek dust. In language, her name endures as verb, Atalantao, to balance perfect weight before decisive motion. In coinage, her profile, hair wind-tangled, appears on rare Arcadian drachmae, one ankle bare, as though always ready to outrun regret. And on crisp nights, elders point to the faint twin stars of Lynx constellation and tell children that Atalanta and Hippomenes wander the heavens, yet guiding lost travellers with a patience learned from a lifetime's yoke, and the freedom earned the moment they chose to remain lions, guardians of every road where love and liberty might collide rather than compete.